Alright everyone, we start off today with some polling analysis and my very preliminary midterm predictions. Of course, this is the first video that I've done in autumn. The other night was the equinox. It was at like 8 p.m. Could have made a video at the time, but that's like 2 o'clock in the morning local. I didn't even get much sleep last night. I was up at 5:30. I guess I could have done it then, but baby care, the cat attacking her sister, fly landing on me and making me itchy and waking me up. It wasn't really the greatest of nights. We're going on the second night where I had maybe half as much sleep as I really would like. Anyway, we'll get into these picks. And again, keep in mind we do have weeks to go till the midterms, so polling can change dramatically, especially in October, last minute. One thing that I would like to point out is that national polling, like the generic ballot, doesn't necessarily trickle down to any individual race. We're beginning to see that. Now, the Dems now have a small advantage in the generic ballot, but over the same period that they've created that advantage, in most of these cases, barring a few, the Republican candidate is actually gaining momentum. We're using polling aggregates from RCP, link in the description, that's for latest polls, you can follow along. Remember that any individual poll is bullshit. Only aggregates matter. In some cases, this forms interesting patterns. We'll be talking about that actually here first, with the Nevada Senate race between Laxalt and Cortez Masto. Cortez Masto, Democratic senator, incumbent, had been leading in the aggregate until basically this month. Laxalt now has nearly a 2-point lead. If I had to judge which way the momentum is going, it would be in his favor. I think this is now leaning towards GOP pickup. This is a Senate seat that the GOP definitely wants. They really had underwhelming expectations, I think, here. But for whatever reason, probably partially related to illegal immigration, let's face it, Masto appears to be losing steam. And again, you're coming from behind, even though you're the incumbent. That probably says that there's some policy failure that's driving what's happening. For Nevada, I have to assume that it's crime and immigration. It's probably also related generically to the economy. By the way, we've got new weekly jobless claims numbers out. They are beginning to rise yet again. I expect unemployment will tick up. And again, this is the last big number we're going to get before the midterms, except for the inflation totals in mid-October. I don't think it'll be good for the Democratic Party. And Roe v. Wade has failed to supplant the economy as the main issue on people's minds. Although I think a looming nuclear war might be inching up the list as well. So I would say this is leaning towards a Republican pickup, but only leaning. We need more polling, and the other problem with the polling that I see here is that when Masto was ahead, there were still a few polls wildly deviated from that aggregate showing Laxalt ahead. And if I just find the middle ground, Cortez Masto would be the victor by a couple of points. Then you have to resort to analyzing turnout, differentials that are based on enthusiasm, etc. The number of voter registrations, the GOP definitely has an advantage in many states on that one. Although, again, it's not always by the same margin. It depends on the state. So I think this is like a 60-40 in Laxalt's favor at the moment. Second, we have the Nevada gubernatorial race, Lombardo versus Sisolak. Another Dem incumbent. Another person who led fairly handily early on until roughly the middle of August, and now appears to have tanked. We have 3 recent polls. 2 show his opponent Lombardo ahead. 1 shows a tie. In the aggregate, Lombardo is now at 1.6. Again, leans towards the GOP at least at this time. Likely pickup, but it's like a 60-40 proposition. It's an underwhelming lead. But when you're running against the incumbent in a state that supposedly has been going more and more blue for a number of cycles, it's a pretty good indicator that the wind is at your back. I think there's enough polling here to show a velocity, if not an actual number. Another problem within statistical analysis. Pennsylvania Senate, Oz versus Fetterman. There is no poll yet in which Mehmet Oz has led Fetterman. Unless we assume considerable turnout differentials, Fetterman should win it. There's one problem in guessing this race. I still give it a lean Fetterman. I'll say 60-40 in Fetterman's favor. A month ago, I would have said it was an 80-20. It looked insurmountable, but the problem is that every time that Fetterman speaks, he doesn't speak well. When he goes to his debate with Mehmet Oz, Can we expect Fetterman to prevail, or can we expect the legacy media generally to try not to cover it using the excuse that Mehmet Oz was endorsed by Trump and is therefore extreme and radical? I have a sneaking suspicion that a lot of networks are going to try to hide the coverage. I have a sneaking suspicion that the legacy media will simply do the commie red wall of silence thing. I can't imagine that Fetterman will actually prevail. He's been constantly talking about wanting people to send him back to New Jersey in his stump speeches because he gets him mixed up with D.C. He's not well-spoken, arguably wasn't before his stroke. The "I had a stroke, so I'm not going to debate" thing really hurt him, and it concords exactly with when he started dropping in the polls. He went from the high single digits to 4.2 over the course of about a month, and it was because of his refusal to debate Mehmet Oz without being an incumbent who had an excuse. That works if you're already the incumbent. Warnock originally didn't want to refuse to debate Herschel Walker, but he had an excuse. He's a sitting senator. It may be a lame excuse, but at least your core fans will give you a pass. Fetterman said, "No, I just don't feel up to it. I just don't want to debate." Now he's finally agreed to one after early voting begins. How convenient, by the way. I suspect that Fetterman will get a boost from that early voting, honk honk, but then end up losing steam thereafter. We'll see about how much that momentum is. Again, though, leans towards Fetterman, which shows that the people of Pennsylvania are in danger of having a crazed extremist leftoid vegetable become their senator. Pennsylvania Governor Mastriano versus Shapiro. Well, Mastriano seems like a fairly solid candidate, and he's certainly within striking distance. I think that Shapiro will probably grab the seat up. I think the Pennsylvania gubernatorial race will go to the Democrats. And it's a little bit beyond lean. In the aggregate, you're talking 6.7. Again, I know that there's likely to be a swing towards the GOP in the final number, which again is not the same state by state, but 6.7 would be one hell of a goddamn swing. You're probably looking at 2 or 3 points. That would be normal. That would be a nominal level. That throws the midterms well towards the GOP. It certainly has them way up in the House. It probably gains them the Senate. It gains them possibly a gubernatorial pickup or two. That's pretty good. It's a red wave election, by the way. I just don't know that I'm willing to predict that it's going to be a 7-point swing. And so I would say that this is reasonably assured for the Democrats, this particular gubernatorial race. Again, it's like a 70-30 maybe, so it's a little bit beyond like Fetterman's odds. Next, New Hampshire Senate. Bolduc versus Hassan. This is where you have Maggie Hassan, Democratic incumbent, supposedly against an underwhelming, terrible, evil, extreme MAGA candidate, Dawn Bolduc. And she's leading in the aggregate by only 8 points. Incumbent advantage, reasonably well-liked in state, supposedly legendarily weak opponent, and you can't clinch double digits. In a state that, again, does lean blue. New Hampshire was the mean, median, and mode of swing states for a while. That has changed. It leans 3 or 4 points towards the Democrats generally now. Hassan, therefore, in my opinion, has an underwhelming lead, and that aggregate includes recent polling, but there's only 2 of them. I would say the velocity is arguably in Hassan's favor, based on the numbers, but we need more polling because you've only got 2 of them in that recent slew. Beyond that, the most recent poll was in April. I think it leans, again, 70-30 leans towards the Democrats to retain this particular gubernatorial seat based on the first polls that we have that are actually in living memory. These are both from mid-September, so they're fairly recent. Then we have Florida Senate, Rubio versus Demings. This will be a close one, but I'm giving it to Rubio. I think that he's got the incumbency. He's ahead in the aggregate by about 3 points. He's led in every poll except for literally one of them, which has a couple of asterisks next to it for a reason, by the way, since time immemorial. Val Demings, I don't think, can scrape together enough of a coalition to defeat Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio is not a particularly popular incumbent. He has his own problems politically. He's not particularly enamored towards the MAGA movement. He's not particularly well-liked by even the neocons. His coalition is kind of derpy. But I think 70-30 in his favor. Even though in the aggregate it's a lower number than in some of these other instances, even like with Fetterman. between turnout differential that's likely to occur and certainly an enthusiasm gap, although I don't think that helps Rubio very much because I can't imagine a huge amount of enthusiasm there. Again, he's led in every poll except for one, and there's no real change in the velocity that I can see within that polling. I think 70-30 in favor of Rubio. We'll be able, by the way, to give more assured predictions closer to midterms. So when I say 70-30 or 60-40, I'm not trying to find wiggle room to excuse a bad prediction. I'm just saying that there's going to be polling for the next 6 weeks, and that's plenty of time, and you'll get more polls, thankfully, over that period. Things will become a little more focused. Florida Governor, DeSantis versus Crist. It's going to be DeSantis. The velocity's in his favor. There's no lack of support. He's got the incumbency. He's constantly in the news. He clearly hasn't lost any support from what's happened lately. If anything, it looks like he's gained some. And yet again, only once has Crist been ahead in the polling. And that was some time ago. That was the beginning of August. You've got plenty of polling on this particular race. And it's DeSantis's to lose, basically. Oh, wait, actually, I'm looking wrong. That poll was from last August, as in from last year. That's the only time Crist was winning, and he was not the candidate at the time, to be clear. He's going to crush, in my opinion, Crist. The big thing to watch, one of the biggest things I'll be watching on election night, is who wins by the greatest margin. DeSantis over Crist. Kemp over Abrams, we'll analyze that separately. I do think that's a win. Or Abbott versus O'Rourke. They're pretty close. I like these numbers. I think DeSantis handily wins. It's a 90% chance that DeSantis is victorious. Again, he could have an October surprise moment. Barring that, he's won already. Ohio Senate, Vance versus Ryan. This is something where the Republicans seem to have written it off originally. They thought that Tim Ryan would actually grab this one. I think J.D. Vance has a 60% chance of winning. Again, he's only got a 2-point lead in the aggregate, but there's only one poll out of 6 and only 1 out of 4 that's actually recent that showed Ryan ahead, and it was only by a point. Again, if there's any turnout differential in the end, J.D. Vance will be elected to the Ohio Senate. Georgia Senate, Walker versus Warnock. This is probably the hardest one to guess out of all of them. I am going to say that Raphael Warnock does have a slight advantage. He has the incumbency. In the recent polls, he leads in 3, Walker leads in 4 of them. But that's a stretch of recent polling, and the advantage is so slim that any turnout differential throws it to Herschel Walker. The big problem is you're also going to have a debate in which Walker has already preemptively said he expects to be trounced. That's lowering expectations. It's a wise move when you do genuinely expect your opponent to be rhetorically more talented. Raphael Warnock is a reverend, has Senate experience, is used to giving speeches. Herschel Walker doesn't have these advantages. But by God, it's going to be close. And if we end up having a significant swing, in one direction or the other from the polling aggregates, it could go either way. Warnock wins by 5 instead of by half a point here, or Walker pulls it off. I'll give a 55% advantage for Raphael Warnock. I can't even give him a 60-40. This one is probably one of the bellwethers to watch. Georgia's a state that now leans slightly blue, but enthusiasm is counterbalancing that. And of course, Georgia has a big crime problem, and Raphael Warnock is a defund the policer. What is going to happen with this race? Can't wait to see the results. Next, we have Georgia Governor Kemp versus Abrams. Again, you've got a pretty similar situation to within Florida. 90% chance that Brian Kemp is reelected. In this case, he has the incumbent advantage, much like DeSantis and Abbott. He's facing a weak opponent. You've already got Cope pieces being posted. I talked yesterday about the Slate piece talking about Stacey Abrams' gubernatorial run isn't the only thing she's doing. She's also a writer and a foremost activist for BLM and other causes. You talk about throwing her under the bus. You're effectively saying, yeah, we know that she's going to lose, but she's doing such a great job in so many ways. Don't sweat it, leftoids. The fact that she lost the gubernatorial bid a second time, and this time it wasn't even in a squeaker, that's not a problem. Don't worry, she has hers. She's got millions of dollars and a good grift going. Brian Kemp is my pick here. 90% chance. Again, you'd have to have an October surprise, or he has a heart attack or something like that. Stacey Abrams is a weak candidate. By the way, that's shared by Christ as well as Abbott's opponent. Which, by the way, I didn't pull up the tab for the Texas gubernatorial race. I definitely have to talk about that. Abbott versus O'Rourke. Abbott has the biggest overall aggregate lead over his opponent of those big three. Greg Abbott has a 95% chance. I give him a little bit more because it's even more of a consistent lead. There's been no poll since polling began literally goddamn last year that's ever showed Beto O'Rourke ahead. Beto, in my opinion, effectively has no chance. There's no chance of his victory. He should go fuck himself, basically. And then finally, Wisconsin Governor Michels versus Evers. Of course, Tony Evers, the Democrat incumbent, is only leading in Wisconsin, state that again has moved more blue fairly recently, is leading by 2.5. It is underwhelming. There was also a Trafalgar poll only a few weeks ago showing it a statistical tie. The Democrat, though, in this race has a 60-40 style advantage. Michels has not led in any poll, although you have a tie, and it doesn't seem that there's any particular trajectory within polling. Again, this could change, but it's probably not going to be a GOP pickup for the gubernatorial slot for Michels. That could change, though. Again, any polling differential, and it throws it towards the Republicans. We're looking at a case, by the way, I'll point out, where a polling swing that's slightly larger than the one that I expect, which is a very conservative 1.5, maybe 2 points. Anything beyond that ends up throwing 2 additional gubernatorial slots to the GOP, along with potentially several Senate slots. They're already going to win the House. That much is assured. We just have to look and see by what margin they win it. There is no conceivable option in my mind for the Democrats not losing the House. Schumer has said he expects to lose the House. And he's Nancy Pelosi's lapdog, so she doesn't really want him to say these things. Really, we're watching the Senate and the gubernatorial slots, and then, of course, down ballot, we're watching state houses. I expect the GOP to pick up a Senate seat, again, a conservative guess, 2 gubernatorial slots, and over and under maybe 30 House seats. That's a reasonably good election for them. Especially when the Democrats have been hyping themselves up, running around in circles and proclaiming there's going to be a blue wave. I hate to tell you, I hope that you can get Cenk to predict that, because then we'll have a similar meltdown to midterms prior when he got clanked on and was all fucked up, because he worked himself up Karl Rove mode. You remember when he was on Fox during the 2012 election and he stormed backstage when they called Ohio for Barack Obama because he was absolutely sure it would go for Romney? And he was red in the face and sweating and panting and yelling at the Fox News people. And they're like, oh, we're just doing our job. We're just doing what we were told. We were told it had been called for Barack Obama. Cenk had a similar meltdown. Every election you have this happen. Nate Silver in 2016 comes to mind. The meltdowns take different forms, but they are always very, very funny. And it'll be funny to watch. So yeah, there's my very preliminary midterm predictions. That's about all. Peace out.